Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar this evening on the Living Streets Dún Laoghaire project. I think there's a couple of people coming in. We've got quite a high attendance plan for this evening. So as people start to stream in, I'll give an overview of what we plan here today. And thank you all so much for joining us on a chilly evening. I hope you're kind of wrapped up somewhere inside with a cup of tea or warm and ready to listen to this presentation we have to give to you today. So my name is Ruth Doyle and I'm a director at a company called CoCo, and we are going to be the moderators here today for this session, and also we're managing the public engagement for this project. So CoCo is a project management and strategic design company. One of the key things we do in CoCo is public engagement and public consultation for local authorities on local policy, on planning and on projects such as this. So we work across environment, health and cultural sectors, and we're absolutely delighted to be managing the public engagement on the Living Streets project. So it's a really important and exciting project for Dún Laoghaire. And I'm also joined here by my colleagues, Dara Carroll, Richie German and Saoirse Gleeson. But we're also here with the broader project team. So this is a consortium group and it is led by Barry Transportation. So we have Rory Collins, who's the project manager on Barry Transportation side here joining us today. We're also joined by Niall Montgomery of Niall Montgomery and Partners, and they are the landscape and urban designers on this project. And then Conor Geraghty, who is leading the project from Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown County Council's active travel team. So just to, if you want to next slide, Conor, the purpose of today, so really it's all about you guys understanding more about the project. So what the project background is, so where it is coming from, what needs it's intending to serve. So why do we need this project now? What does it look like? So what are the main design aspects to this project? And Conor will give an overview of the key elements that we're looking at. And then what the process is around developing the design for this project and some of the traffic modeling and other factors that are feeding into this design. And then at the end of the presentation, I will give a quick overview of the engagement approach, and then we'll have space for questions and comments. Now, I want to just quickly outline the format that we're using today. So it is a webinar, and largely it is based on kind of raising this understanding of the project and what's involved and what's going to be happening over the next couple of months. We are really, really keen also for you, if you have any kind of questions or points to contribute, to please use the chat function. You'll see down the bottom of your screen, everybody should have a chat function, which just looks like a kind of a speech bubble down the bottom of the bar. So as we go through the presentation and as you're listening to what Conor or I or anybody is saying, please put your comments into the chat. So you might have a question around the project design, or you might have a suggestion, or you might have some comments. So please, as we go through, put those through into the chat function. And myself and my colleagues in CoCo will be able to review those comments. Those comments will go directly through to the panelists. They won't appear on the side of the screen for everybody who's in attendance to see it, but it will go through to us. So as we go through, we'll be reviewing those and capturing some of the main points that are coming through. And at the end of the webinar and at the end of Conor's presentation, we'll then have a discussion around those, and Dara can summarize the main questions that are coming through. And just to say generally, you know, this webinar is part of a series of engagement activities that we're going to be holding in this preliminary design phase, which is over the next month and a half, over January and through to the start of February. And then also in the statutory consultation phase, there will be a range of engagement activities. So, you know, as with all our engagement activities, any comments that you make here today or any suggestions or queries you have will be noted by our project team and captured and then fed into that process of informing the preliminary design at this stage. So we'll be capturing those comments, and we are also recording the session. I know, you know, this is just to have the discussion posted online for others who couldn't attend. You won't be visible in the recording. It'll just be the project team who you can see along the panel on your right hand side on your screen now. So it won't be clear that, you know, that you were in attendance. Your name won't appear, but it's just really important for us to have, as part of the kind of raising awareness and spreading information and understanding on the project, to have this recording available for a wide audience on Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown's Citizen Space website. So I'm going to hand over next to Conor Geraghty, who will give an overview of the main aspects of the design of the project. And then I'll come back on and explain some of the next engagement kind of steps that we have, and then we'll have a discussion with the group. So as I said, feel free to begin throughout the presentation to post anything into the comments that you'd like to raise with Connor and the wider team, and then we will revisit those at the end of the presentation. And if there's any questions or comments now about the approach, or if anyone just, you know, feel free to put into the chat, and we'll start to get back to you. But I will hand over to Connor for now.
Thanks, Ruth, and good evening, everybody. And as Ruth said, thank you for taking the time to attend this webinar this evening. So as Ruth said, I'm Senior Engineer for Active Travel with DLR, and I'm leading the project from Laoghaire-Rathdown's perspective. So maybe just as a starting point, a statement about what Living Streets Dún Laoghaire is. And while we've called it a new project, it's not a new approach or a new vision for Dún Laoghaire. It's one that's been evolving over a number of years through policy and various projects. And it involves sustainable mobility and public realm improvements, not only in the town, but in the wider residential areas. So what we aim to do is to make our town and the wider areas and local streets safer and greener, connect communities, and to keep our economy vibrant and growing. And to achieve this, we've set down a number of objectives, and they're dotted in red there. I'll go through them in a little bit more detail later on, but just as a high level, the objective to improve walking and cycling options for those within the area, to connect communities and give people different options, to create greener places, inclusive travel, vibrant economy, and then a community to improve community well-being and health as an overall vision. So as a sort of a starting point, that is what we're trying to achieve as part of this project. To talk a little bit about the history of it, as I mentioned, that it's been well supported in policy down through the year, including successive development plans, urban framework plans, and wider national policies. And that's kind of the starting point, that it's not as a kind of an idea that's dropped from the sky. It's one that's been developing over a number of years. You will recall in 2021, in July, August, and September, we did a trial pedestrianisation of Georgia Street as part of our COVID mobility works. And this, following the evaluation, then a recommendation was to progress a permanent scheme, but also to extend the scheme along the full length of Georgia Street. From there, then this evolved into the Living Streets, and I'll talk a little bit more about how that happened. But the point we're at now is obviously public engagement about the principles of the scheme. And as we work up the detail to continue the public engagement, and a part of that is the traffic modelling exercise that was undertaken, but also options around bus routing and how other changes that might happen within the town. So moving forward, excuse me, is when we prepare the designs, then there'll be additional public engagement and opportunity to feedback on people's thoughts. And that's in advance of the statutory planning, which obviously is, once you get into a statutory planning function, then you're kind of it's quite time sensitive. So we'd hope to have a lot of the engagement completed in advance of that. And with all going well, we would hope to start construction in 2024 and be completed in 2025. So why is this project needed? Well, as we see it, there are a number of local issues. Year on year, there has been increased congestion on residential streets, and obviously this has an impact on road safety and safety in general, but also a health and environmental impact with increased emissions, poor air quality and noise pollution. So this is something we believe has to be addressed, and obviously as a wider policy objective as well, has to be addressed. Much of the current vehicular traffic through Dún Laoghaire in the westbound direction is simply that, it's through traffic. So 60% of the cars are just using Dún Laoghaire as a way to get somewhere else. So they're not adding anything to the town, but they're obviously taking up a large amount of space that could be used for something else like planting or seating or public realm spaces. For those that are driving to Dún Laoghaire as a town, as a destination, nearly half of them are from within a 1 kilometre radius. So this is 50% of car trips. People are driving a kilometre to get to Dún Laoghaire town. There's obviously a whole variety of reasons why that might be the case. There was obviously people who must drive or have no other option, but obviously that's a large target that we can try and encourage people to change mode and either walk or cycle if the facilities were there to support that. So there's a lot that can be done with the space that's currently allocated to those uses. Local residents and community groups have obviously come forward and they're advocating for change. So they've said to us that they want to see their areas better, and a big concern that they have is about the volume and speed of traffic in their areas, and that, you know, coming from maybe a COVID situation where there was lockdown and people experienced what very low traffic neighbourhoods are like, that this is something that people are advocating to make changes in their area. Purely from a strategic active travel perspective, one of my roles is to complete a cycle network in the entire Laoghaire-Rathdown area. So connectivity between existing routes like the Metals or the coastal route and schemes that have recently been through planning like DLR Central. Trying to connect all of these schemes together is something that we have to do, and this project aims to try and achieve those connections. As I mentioned, there's quite a strong policy support for what we're doing, and the development plan recently adopted sets out a concept for a 10-minute settlement concept, which is a very equitable solution where, depending what mode you choose, that an option is available for you if you choose to either walk or cycle or get the bus. When it comes to the urban framework plan, it sort of had three kind of core strategies, and they're in the bubbles on the right. So they were trying to create synergies between the town centre and the waterfront, and very much the waterfront area is very well established as a kind of a leisure and attractor for people that want to maybe go for a walk or use the sea facilities. We're trying to reconnect those people with the main street is something that's been worked on for a number of years, and getting better connections up through the town and back to the main street is really important. That, in conjunction with high quality placemaking and creating more vitality in the town, so more footfall, encouraging people to come up as a place where they could linger and spend money, is obviously going to contribute to the town, and that's really important. And then number three, as you move wider out into the community, that we strengthen links with the adjoining areas. So people from Dalkey or Killiney or Glasstool or Honey Park or Monkstown, if they wanted to come to Dún Laoghaire, that they're facilitated in whichever mode that they choose. So most people would likely be aware, but just it's worth repeating that Dún Laoghaire Town was the winner of the Academy of Urbanism Award for Great Town, Small City in 2022. And this is a European scale award that recognises the work that has been done to try and improve Dún Laoghaire Town over the last number of years, but also recognised where we are heading. And particularly we were credited with the kind of tactical urbanism around temporary schemes to try new things as a way to facilitate more ambition and larger schemes into the future. So that's a really positive sort of acknowledgement that the way that Dún Laoghaire is heading is in the right direction. So following the summer streets, the completion of the summer streets, and we made a recommendation that we progress to a permanent pedestrianisation scheme. There was an opportunity to apply to the Department of Transport for what were called Pathfinder projects. So a Pathfinder project is described as a high impact, local, sustainable transport and public space initiative supported by the government, and that it had to be delivered rapidly. So they wanted to complete it by 2025. And what these projects are, ones that would have a national focus and to become exemplars of how to do things right. And in terms of Dún Laoghaire, it was selected as one of only 35 projects. And it gives it a national profile, but it also brings with it support from the government and the Department of Transport that they will support this, but then also roll out the model that we are working on to other towns as the way to do it. Dún Laoghaire is also a decarbonising zone as part of our own climate action plan. And obviously that's again to try and meet the climate objectives that are set down in the National Climate Action Plan, that walking, cycling and public transport would account for 50%. And to get this fairly significant modal shift, it'll require fundamental reuse of space to facilitate those changes. And again, that's what this project is hoping to do. In relation to the Summer Streets programme, it was carried out over 3 months, and commercial activity in terms of deliveries was facilitated up till 11 a.m. And after that, the street was fully pedestrianised from Patrick Street all the way down to Merton Square. And we took the opportunity at that stage to try and make that space that became available a much more livable space by adding benches and picnic tables and allowing businesses out onto the street and organising events. And that formed the basis of the review that was done for the Summer Streets. So even in advance of that trial, what we did was we carried out fairly extensive public consultation. So we had over 1,000 submissions with about 70% preference from people to go ahead with a trial pedestrianisation. And we gathered data all through the 3 months and post removal data as well. And we had that independently evaluated. And what that report showed was that once we pedestrianised the main street, the footfall increased and more people came to the town. What's notable is that the volume of vehicular trips didn't really change. So even though there were more people in the town, people were changing mode because it became a nicer place to be, but those that were choosing to drive were still facilitated. So there was a clear change in travel pattern, and 14% of residents reported that they now cycle more because they realise they can get to the town. So on balance, it showed that the scheme worked even across the 3 months, which is a very short time to be reviewing over, and that it had its significant benefits. So within that, 81% of residents said, and 67% of customers and 44% of businesses would like to see the scheme implemented permanently. So it had very strong support, and I suppose that's what's helped us build to an even more ambitious scheme as part of the Living Streets project. So to talk a little bit about the project aims and what that means in reality. So in terms of safe walking and cycling, we want to make it more convenient, enjoyable and safer for all, so that if you choose to walk or cycle or take the bus, that you feel confident that it's safe, it's a mode that's available to you, and that if it's your choice, that it is there and you can get to the town safely. Convenient, connected communities obviously is the wider piece around connecting the communities, that it doesn't just facilitate getting to town, but if you wanted to come through the town in various different modes, that's facilitated. Greener places is about improving the environment, so that's reducing CO2, traffic, noise, air pollution, increasing planting and biodiversity within the town. Inclusive travel relates to equitable travel options and urban design, obviously, that facilitates everybody regardless of their economic status, their age, their gender, their ability, or their or any other disability. Obviously, if you're trying to travel in a vehicle, you have to have a certain ability to afford a vehicle, and that's not available for everybody. So inclusive town and urban planning allows for anybody in any mode that they choose, regardless of their circumstances. To enhance the economic vibrancy of Dún Laoghaire as a mixed use town. So what we're hoping to do is create an environment that attracts people in, but also encourages them to stay, because it's a nice place to be. And that in turn generates more economic activity in the town. And I think that's well established across all of Europe. That's what happens when you make high quality space available for people. We want to promote health and well-being in the community. So obviously more active travel is better for your health. More outdoor play and recreation and social interaction is good for community building. So if we can bring all those together, I think it would truly create this livable streets concept that we're trying to promote. To talk a little bit more about specifics, and if we just look at an overview of the map, and on the top there, the red line includes the pedestrianisation part that happened at the trial, which was subsequently extended out to become what was called the Georgia Street Public Realm, and is now Pathfinder and subsequently Living Streets. So essentially what we're trying to do is the area in green there is a kind of the main focus, and we're trying to create a quiet neighborhood within that, similar to what's in Coolonore and other areas. So if you choose to walk or cycle, that you feel comfortable, and the benefit to that is that if you can reduce speed and volume of vehicles, you don't need any other interventions like traffic calming or segregated cycle facilities. So it allows more opportunity for build outs that include planting and more high quality public realm. So then there are existing facilities like the coastal route and the metals, and we'd also, as a part of a different project, look to close any gaps in the active travel network. And the dashed line at the bottom is the DLR Central project, and that's been through the planning process and is heading for site, all going well this year. So as I mentioned earlier, the challenge for us is trying to connect the segregated high quality walking and cycling facilities through the town in a way that works for everybody. In terms of look and feel and materials, these are just a few shots of existing projects with the metals on the top right, the main street, and what we're trying to do is trying to bring consistency across the whole town, so that it's not just the area that is proposed to be pedestrianised, so that gets all the materials, that this is brought along the whole Georgia Street to make it feel unified and consistent, and that everybody understands that you're now on the main street. As you move further out into the Living Streets, the photograph on the top left is Desmond Avenue off Cross Avenue. So this would be probably what we're suggesting, build out safer crossing points, improve planting. On the right, top right and bottom right, they're examples of modal filters. So what a modal filter is where you filter out different modes. So you allow walking, cycling and bus in some instances, but you filter out vehicles. And the benefit to that is that it allows space then to be reallocated to other uses like parking or landscaping or seating. And so they're just maybe examples of the different types of interventions that we're considering. So when all this is completed, we hope to have a safer walking environment. So we want access to the town obviously to be maintained for bus and rail users, but also for those driving, that if you choose to drive, that the access is there for you. We want better connections between the existing walking and cycling infrastructure, and signposting and wayfinding is a kind of a key objective as well to make it legible to everybody. So regardless of which mode you choose, that it's easily understood how to get to and get around Dún Laoghaire. To talk a little bit about what we've done to date. So we've obviously reviewed all the historical data, including policies and reports, and the data that was collected during Summer Streets. We've carried out topographical surveys, and that's a 3D generated, it's an AutoCAD model of the entire town. So that's where we measure every tree and every curb, every double yellow line, every road marking, and it gives us a map then that we can generate designs off. We've done a GPR survey, which is a ground penetrating radar, and that maps all of the underground services and allows us then to design where we can put maybe trees or planting, or if we have to alter any of the existing services. We've reviewed all of the existing trees in terms of their health and whether or not they might need to be replaced or additional planting done. We've identified key issues, and the Summer Streets report has made a recommendation or maybe a list of things that had to be considered as part of this project. And it's more, I've included them in these slides more just to reassure people that we're aware that things like parking, loading, access, bus routing, connectivity to areas like the hospital, we're aware that these are very key challenges that have to be addressed as part of this project, and we're not going to shy away from that. So we do have to look at the bus routing, and as I mentioned, we've done quite a large traffic modelling exercise, and that allows us to test options. So that would give us, apart from assisting us in the decision-making process, gives us confidence around that any proposed plan would work. And then we're moving into the stage now where we're developing engineering and architectural layouts for the streets. So as I mentioned, the bus routing option is a key issue that we have to address. And obviously, if the pedestrianisation was to be made permanent, it does impact the bus routing and particularly access to the hospital. So that's something that we are continually working on with the NTA, who are the bus operator provider. Getting good connectivity between sites and the wider community as well is obviously another one that has to be achieved as part of this project. And then as part of that, we are looking at modal filters and then what the impact on the wider traffic network would be. Signage and wayfinding, I already mentioned that these are important for legibility, but they're particularly important for directional signage for vehicles, but also signage in relation to car parking options. So if there are, car parking spaces available, that's easy to understand where they are, either via signs on the road or a parking map or app, that you can plan your journey ahead of time with confidence that when you get there that there would be parking, and avoid, if you're using your vehicle, having to roam around Dún Laoghaire. And then obviously inclusivity is very important, that it accommodates everybody of all ages and abilities. So we obviously have to maintain access for services and businesses. So that's for the day-to-day maintenance, including deliveries and bins and taxis and emergency services. And we're keenly aware that these are issues that have to be maintained, and we are addressing them as part of the project. But we also want the town to be very accessible for people who are visiting, but also for residents, so that when you choose to come to Dún Laoghaire, it's a very easy and inviting thing to do. Just to talk a little bit about the traffic modelling. So initially what we did was we used the National Transport Authority Eastern Regional model. So this is a model of the Greater Dublin area, and I'm not sure if my cursor is showing, but on this picture on the left, this is Dublin city centre, this is Dún Laoghaire, and this is the kind of information we get back from the Eastern Regional model. And it takes about 72 hours to do one run of the model, and it gives us information like where people are coming from to get to Dún Laoghaire, where they're leaving Dún Laoghaire to get to, and it gives us a real understanding of travel patterns, but also of the trip types as well, in and out of Dún Laoghaire. So in addition to that, then we've generated a local area model, because obviously a model of the scale of the Greater Dublin area would be too broad and wouldn't provide us enough useful information at a very local level. So we've generated a local area model that's been validated based on the Eastern Region model, but also on traffic count data that was done at 33 points around the various locations. So within that model, we can generate and replicate the current traffic patterns, and this photograph on the left shows this is just queuing at a junction as part of the validation program at peak times in the AM, just knowing that we understand where the issues are at the moment. So then what we can do is we can make changes to the road network, and then we can test what that would do with the traffic. So then we can also make changes to the signals and predict if the movement happens as it does or as predicted, then we can alter the signals, and it gives us confidence that the network will function as intended if any changes are made. So at that point, I think I don't have anything else, Ruth. So I'm just going to hand it back to talk a little bit about the engagement and next steps.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Conor, and thanks everyone for your questions coming through already. We're collating those and we'll get to them in just a few minutes. So, I mean, for this project, we really want to try and encourage as many people as possible to get involved, and are offering a variety of ways for people to find out more and to have their voice heard. Obviously, it doesn't suit everyone to do things online, webinars don't suit everyone, online surveys, etc. So through the preliminary design phase, which is what we're in now, and the statutory consultation phase, which will be when we submit for planning around April, we'll be running a range of different ways for people to get involved. So that will be online surveys. We have an online survey currently live on Citizen Space website, workshops, meetings with specific groups, and I'll kind of go through that in a second. We hope to have a pop-up shop in the pop-up shop that you see on Dún Laoghaire Main Street. So that will be open for a week or two during the statutory period. And that's really for people who are passing by, might want to drop in, but equally people who are specifically interested in discussing some issues could call into us at that particular point. We have a pop-up planned for the library. We haven't got a date fixed, but the Lexicon Library, we plan to hold a pop-up there in the next couple of weeks. And we're also holding next week on Wednesday afternoon, we're holding a drop-in information session in the local school there on Convent Road. So we'd encourage all of you to come along there. If you want to go to the next slide there, Conor. And just mentioning, you know, obviously we're promoting these kind of events on social media, but we're also reaching out through networks. So some of the groups we've spoken to are umbrella groups, for example, the Dún Laoghaire Business Association, DLBA, but also PPN, who obviously have a range of community groups in their network. We've been sending out circulars and emails to them, trying to raise awareness of all these activities that are happening now. Equally, the residents association, so that's DLR Central. I know that is kind of an umbrella residents association for a range of the residents associations directly within the project area that we're talking about. So we've been sending out emails to over 80 of these particular groups in the last week, just letting them know of all these different things that are happening, the survey, the drop-in session in the school, and also our pop-up. So really, I mean, and I know some people have been putting some comments, like, have you spoken to particular groups? We'd love to hear from you as well, you know, so if there are particular groups that you think we should reach out with, let us know. We've got our own list and we're confident that we've covered off quite a lot of people. So we will be hoping to raise awareness amongst those groups, and equally they can contact us and arrange a meeting if they feel like they want to discuss the project. So with the survey, we'd encourage everyone who's here to complete it, but equally, you know, some of these groups might want to make a submission on behalf of their group. So if anyone is here from those groups, we want to hear from you, and it's possible to make a submission on behalf of your group as well as individuals. So we will post the link to the survey there in a minute, and also bring up some further information about our drop-in session, I think, as we close out. But I know we have a number of kind of questions coming through now. So if Dara, would you like to kind of zoom in and just pick out one or two that we might begin with?
Yeah, thanks, Ruth, and thanks everyone. Yes, there's a good number of questions and comments coming in already. I think a couple of questions associated with St. Michael's Hospital and the importance of the bus stop and public transport access to the hospital. And that bus stop there is noted as being important for shoppers and other citizens. Another person has noted mobility connection between St. Michael's and the Dara station and as well. So maybe Conor, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, thanks, Dara. And I mentioned in slides, obviously, that's one of the big issues, that if the street is pedestrianised permanently, that the bus routing would be impacted. So what we're doing at the moment is we're looking at we acknowledge that access to the hospital is obviously critically important for a lot of people, and also to the shopping areas of Bloomfields. So we're looking at what can be done in terms of the existing bus routing. Can the existing buses, if altered, provide as good a service, maybe in a different direction or in a different route? We're also considering things like micro shuttle buses, should that run a loop of the town to pick up these trips, or even if there's kind of demand, opportunity for demand of assisted trips either by trishaw or golf cart or even hackney or taxi, is that something that could be put in place to try and deal with people that, you know, previously needed to get right to the door but maybe can't? So I absolutely accept that it's a critical issue that has to be dealt with as part of the project. So we're looking through a whole range of options at the moment, Dara, and we'll try to get the one that provides at least as close to as good a facility as is there at the moment.
Yeah. Thank you, Conor. Couple of questions about, will this include a segregated cycling infrastructure? Jason asked about connecting from DLR Central to the coastal mobility.
I can't hear you there, Dara, but maybe others can.
I can hear Dara here, okay.
Yeah. Connecting to DLR Central to the coastal mobility route.
Dara, oh.
Sorry, Ruth, I can hear Dara.
Yeah.
I think Ruth is just having an issue there.
So maybe Ruth's having a problem there. Yeah.
So just to summarise, a connection from DLR Central down to the coastal route via Carrickbrennan Road, I think was the question, Dara, was it?
That's right, yes.
So Carrickbrennan Road is not part of the Living Streets project, but it is a commitment that we had given to the members previously as part of the DLR Central Part 8 that we would progress a scheme on Carrickbrennan Road. So we have applied for funding from the NTA to progress that this year, and I'm optimistic that they're going to support us on that. So the answer is that I accept that that's a link that has to be made, and it'll be progressed as a separate project. And if it goes as a separate project to this, it may happen in advance of this project, but I think the answer to the question is yes. Okay.
Related, I suppose, in terms of cycling infrastructure, it says, yeah, allocation of roadway to cycleways as a potential to cause traffic congestion. Is there any comment on that in relation to this scheme?
Yeah, well, that wouldn't be my experience, I suppose, Dara, that generally where we've provided high quality facilities, we've achieved modal shift. Obviously, any change to the network requires time to settle down. So in terms of Dún Laoghaire, and I touched on it in the presentation, when the pedestrianisation was put in, it didn't impact journey times for those choosing to drive. And then on the coastal route, the TUW are doing an analysis, and again, it hasn't shown that across the network that there is a significant traffic congestion issue as a result of cycle facilities. But I suppose it is worth pointing out that what we're being told as a local authority from a design perspective is to prioritise pedestrians first, then cyclists, then public transport, and finally vehicles. So in a reallocation of road space, we are being told, and it's mandatory, that the vehicle gets pushed to the bottom. So what we're trying to do as part of this project is to provide the walking, cycling, and public transport options to a high standard, so that it encourages the people that maybe are traveling very short distances or have the ability to change mode. So then that frees up road space for those that can't or must drive. So generally when it's, and this would be across Europe, when it's done to the right standard, that's what's achieved.
So Conor, and I think related to this question, are segregated cycle routes being created as part of this scheme? Well,
from a design perspective, the ideal situation is one where you use the existing infrastructure to cycle on. So I touched on the kind of example of Coolanore earlier, where the traffic speeds and volumes are very low within the area. So it feels very comfortable and very safe to cycle on the carriageway. So there are two things you could do when it comes to the existing road network. You could accept that the speeds and volumes are required, in which case you would have to install segregated cycle infrastructure for people to feel safe, or you can choose to reduce the speed and volume to a point where people feel safe to cycle on the road. And I think that's where we're heading with Living Streets. And I mentioned about the volume of maybe through traffic and rat running, and if that was removed from areas, then there would be no requirement to install segregated cycling infrastructure, because the only vehicles in those areas would be residential. In which case, then obviously, if you don't have to cycle, or if you don't have to install cycle infrastructure, then you don't also have to look at removing parking or reallocating road space. So that's where this project is maybe at, rather than looking at, fully segregated facilities. That would be maybe a last option rather than a first option.
And just linking to that, a question about modal filters, and because that's what we're talking about instead of segregated cycle routes. do modal filters allow residents cars through?
Generally not. There's no ability for us to differentiate between somebody who lives there and somebody who chooses to drive there. So it's a public road. Everybody has equal opportunity to space. So a modal filter just filters the mode. There's no differentiating between a resident, in the same way that if it's public parking, a resident has no more right to it than any other member of the public. It's equal across the board. I suppose it is worth pointing out that access is constantly maintained. We're not proposing to close roads or I don't even think there's one-way streets suggested in this scheme. And for residents then, that if there is modal filters installed there, if they choose to drive, obviously we would hope they wouldn't, but if they choose to drive, their trip may be slightly longer. But the benefit of that is that they get the improved environment, better air quality, better noise reduction, less problems with their streets in terms of traffic capacity and space. So that's, unfortunately, there isn't any way, in the same way we can't give residents only parking, because there's no such thing in legislation.
Question from Michael. It's just pointing out limited access currently to the town, and highlights particular the one-way system on the coastal mobility route that was introduced. Is there a way of reinstating two-way traffic on Queen's Road from Sandycove to Blackrock?
Well, there isn't, not while the coastal route is in place there. So to reinstate two-way traffic, we would have to remove the coastal route. And if that was to happen, obviously that would go against the policy objectives that are set down in that we're trying to prioritise walking and cycling. But to answer the question, I don't think two-way traffic could be reinstated while the coastal route's in place. Thanks,
Conor. Question about maintenance, really, and policing, and from Councillor Lorraine Hall, and just highlighting the importance to ensure maintenance, and also engagement with the Gardaí to request more policing, particularly in light of other developments such as Myrtle Square and Convent Lane. Would you like to comment on that, Conor?
Yeah, what we did during the summer streets was we held a meeting every week on a Friday, usually with the business residents, and the Gardaí attended the meetings, where we kind of worked together to deal with any issues, like if there was any antisocial concerns or security issues in the town. And thankfully, there didn't seem to be any negative impact in terms of, even though there was a lot more people in the town. But we do liaise with the Gardaí, and we'll continue to liaise with the Gardaí as part of this project. The Gardaí are quite adaptable in terms of their, if facilities are changed, obviously they have motorcyclists and bicycles and different modes that they can choose to police areas, and they do adapt to the situations that they're. Unfortunately, I can't give a commitment that the Gardaí would do something more or less, but we certainly would engage with them and encourage them to do that.
Thanks, Conor. Question from Ger. Could you maybe explain the process that would be used when it goes to the statutory stage? In other words, Part 8, and what does that mean? And what does it entail?
So when it comes to local authority development, there's primarily two legislative provisions that we use. Section 38 of the Roads Act is one that's generally used when providing cycle facilities or public transport facilities, and that's an executive function of the council that we would do public consultation. The other legislative provision is a Part 8, which is a statutory function, and that's where we do a site notice and set up public, the plans go on public display and it goes online, and that report is brought to the elected members to make a decision on. So the differentiation between the two is depending on what's proposed in the scheme. So if the scheme is primarily facilities for, say, buses and cycling, then it would be exempted from Part 8. So not to try and sidestep a question, Darren, but it depends what it is proposed as to which legislative provision we would use.
Question on loading bays, and so I presume it from a commercial interest would be loading bays that allow for large heavy deliveries, where shops can't dictate when the deliveries are made within the pedestrianised zone. Could you maybe talk to that?
Yeah, so I think generally what happened during summer streets was that up till 11 o'clock, commercial deliveries were allowed down the street, and then obviously not outside of those hours. I think obviously loadings are very important, and issue that we need to address. But if it's a very large vehicle, there will be restrictions on when it could attend. And obviously, from their own health and safety perspectives, they wouldn't want to be coming into a street after 11 o'clock if it's very busy. But the loading bays, depending on the bus routing, is something that we haven't settled on. But certainly we have to facilitate commercial access to businesses.
I might just come in there as well, just with another question while we're on the point of kind of the urban realm design. There was a question about the cobblestones and just kind of general finishes and the look and feel of the urban design. So I don't know if maybe John Montgomery from Niall Montgomery and Partners wants to come in on that one.
Yeah, I suppose in terms of finishes, in general, we're looking to follow the same aesthetic and the principles that have been established in the metals. I think Conor touched on that a little bit earlier on. So we're not looking to really, I suppose, compete with the architecture. There was a point earlier on there about the period of the buildings. We're not looking to compete with them, but complement them. And using kind of warmer materials, like I say, that have been established then at the metals also. The cobbles, I feel your pain being a cyclist, trying to get across them. And it's something certainly that's in consideration, and what kind of finishes, particularly the tactile element as well, and universal access, how we'll integrate them into the project.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks,
John. Question, Conor, just again on the modal barriers or filters, as to where they're to be placed, and just on the related, is Tivoli Road part of the Living Streets area, or is it the outer limit? In other words, will that be where through traffic will be funneled?
Yes, Tivoli Road is part of the project as a whole, and we are looking at it for interventions in terms of where any potential modal filters would go. I suppose the objective of the project is to try and get rid of unnecessary or strategic traffic in areas. So the traffic model I referenced earlier, we'll test, and I think we're up to maybe 10 different options that we've tested where modal filters are placed in different spots. And obviously what we want to avoid is a situation where you do something in one area and has a negative consequence on another area. So in a short answer, Tivoli Road is one of the areas where we're testing a modal filter. And then assuming that the traffic modeling can work, then we balance the traffic signals to accommodate the changes in traffic. And we're optimistic that the traffic modeling exercise will show that even if the volumes of traffic that are traveling today, which is generally what the traffic modeling is set up to do, don't change, or we don't get any modal shift, that we can still accommodate those within the network. Obviously, our experience would be people do change modes for a variety of reasons. But that's probably the next step there in terms of what we present once we get those finalized.
Okay. Might direct one at you, Ruth, or...
Yeah, it was just, there was a question about rat running in Crosswaith and how will that be impacted by the designs that are proposed with the project?
Are you going to answer that, Ruth, or do you want me to take it?
Yeah. Well, I'll hand that one over to you, I think, Conor.
So we are aware of that concern, and generally what's happening is that Glenageary Road Lower, and the modelling is showing this, is under some pressure. So people are either looking to Crosswaith or to Clorinda Park as a way to skip, and that's essentially what rat running is to try and gain time advantage by using a different street. So in answer to the question, we would hope that any proposed interventions would remove any time advantage for doing that. So there would be nothing to gain by going through Crosswaith. But again, until the modelling is finalised, I can't say for sure. But the idea is that there'd be no advantage to people going through those areas because they can't get there any quicker.
Okay, thanks, Conor.
So I will put this one to you, Ruth, as question around speaking to the residents of Georgia Street itself, and how will they be considered, particularly as they're going to be dealing with a pedestrianisation 7 days a week, 50 days, 52 weeks a year. So I think someone just highlighted the importance of speaking to Georgia Street residents.
Yeah, thanks. So I mean, we are talking to it's a good point. We're talking to the business association, so obviously they represent the businesses on the street, and then we're also talking to DLR Central. But if there's a particular way that we can access and speak to the residents on the main street, like, we would absolutely welcome that. we plan on doing, you know, a leaflet drop to raise awareness that way. But if anyone has a particular suggestion, if they don't feel like that the residents on the main street are covered by Dún Laoghaire Central Residents Association, if there's a separate kind of group that we could talk to, we would love to hear about that. Like I said, we plan to do a leaflet drop in the statutory phase. We're also kind of leafleting around the town over the next few days to raise awareness about the drop-in centre, and would hope that some of the local residents would see that way. But we were absolutely open to any suggestions you have that can help us get more direct contact with the residents on the main street. We would hope the pop-up shop, again, being there for a week or two during the statutory period, would actually, you know, spark some awareness from people who walk past. But any suggestions, yeah, please put them in the comments. I'm kind of aware of time now. We said we'd go on about 45 minutes. I just want to check in with Dara and to see if we've covered off most of the comments. We weren't sure that we'd get through everything in the time we had anyway, so we have definitely recorded. I know some people asked a question on a particular theme and then had a follow-up question, so we might not have got through the full thread of all your queries, but we certainly kind of have captured the themes.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there are still many questions coming in and comments, so we'll only be able to address a few more of those. But as you say, Ruth, they're all captured as part of the feedback. Yeah. So I might continue on with a few others.
Yeah.
If we can, Conor.
Yeah, I think we'll take one or two more. Yeah.
Particular question, I suppose, is a follow-up question about deliveries. Some businesses can't get deliveries before 11 a.m. If there's anything to support these businesses after 11 a.m. with storage and transport of goods. Again, that was Councillor Lorraine Hall.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Hall. So what we did during summer streets, obviously the vehicles could transition down the street to do their deliveries up to 11. But outside of that, we had loading bays on the periphery. So we had some on Convent Road and Convent Lane and Sussex Street, and there was one just outside St. Michael's Hospital where vehicles that couldn't deliver before 11 came right up to the periphery of the scheme, and then they could complete it either using, sometimes they used a hand trolley or a truck, or some of them were deliveries by hand. So that's kind of where we're thinking again, that for those that maybe can't make those times, that there would be spaces on the outside of the pedestrianised area so that access can be still maintained. But if they didn't get there before 11, it might be something that they had to, you know, bring on a hand trolley or a truck maybe. Maybe just to add one other comment to that as part of the issue around getting people to the hospital, I mentioned previously a kind of a golf cart type shuttle that would go up and down the street. But obviously, if that was a recommended solution, then that could also be used to help people load or unload if they were in that area. So that's maybe just where we're thinking to try and facilitate all those movements even during the pedestrianisation.
Okay, just finally, maybe just a couple of questions on timing, Conor. So a couple of people have asked, you know, when is this happening? And Sean was bemoaning that 2024 is a long time to wait, and is it possible to trial some of these measures in advance of full construction?
Well, we've already tried the pedestrianisation, so we'd be confident that would work. Once you get into a situation where you're looking at a full traffic management plan for Dún Laoghaire, if we go the Part 8 route, which would be the statutory planning route, then once the plan is adopted, or if it's adopted, then there's no opportunity to trial. It just has to be built as per the planning, and that's, you know, whatever is set down in the planning. Because during COVID, we were reacting very quickly, that the trialing or maybe the quick implementation allowed a lot of flexibility for things to be changed, so that we didn't have to go through things like traffic modelling, which obviously takes a significant amount of time. But given that this is a permanent scheme and that the businesses had been advocating that we look at this in a traffic modelling scenario, I think there's nothing to be gained from a trial, because we'd be confident that it would work in terms of the overall mobility of the town. So the Georgia Street itself, obviously, if we're going to bring consistency to the materials and the planting, that there's a significant construction project there, and that's where probably the bulk of the time is. But the mobility changes in other areas, like modal filters, could happen very quickly. So if all went positively and we achieved, if it is to be a Part 8, then the mobility changes could happen quite quickly. But obviously, the construction on Georgia Street would be a more significant task.
Okay, thanks, Conor. Yeah, questions still coming in, but time doesn't really allow us to continue. I know we've, as I said, we've got loads of questions. So hopefully we've got a flavor of them to those attending. But maybe Ruth, if you want to have some closing remarks on the further engagement and how we capture this information.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dara, and everybody for your comments. So yeah, I suppose closing comments is just to say that, you know, obviously this is the first kind of webinar and the first kind of large information touch point we've had with you all around the project. We really want you to stay involved. We do have a survey up online, so anyone who's there, it would be great if you could all even just take a moment now, and I know Saoirse or Richie, one of my colleagues, will repost the link in the chat function there as well, so you could click into that, and that survey will give you a chance to provide more extensive feedback on the project and what you would like to see the project involve from your perspective. So what matters to you? Again, you can do it by yourself or you can do it on behalf of a broader group. We are having a drop-in information evening, and that is happening next Wednesday. That's Wednesday, the 25th of January, and it's on for 3 hours from 5 until 8 p.m. in the Dominican Primary School on Convent Road. So we'll be presenting similar information in a, you know, it's just a slightly kind of different format, but we will all be there. The project team will be there again if there's anything that you wanted to discuss in further detail with us. And please do spread awareness of that drop-in information evening amongst your friends. I know some people saying, you know, residents in Georgia Street. We've tried our best to get the word out there through the grapevine, through using the networks, through leaflets, but please do spread the word. So that's next Wednesday. We're trying to find a date, or we will find a date, but we just haven't established it yet, for a pop-up in the library, which will be similar to the kinds of approach and information displayed in the information evening. So those are the kinds of activities that are happening at this phase during the preliminary design. And actually, just to mention as well, if you want to stay involved by doing the survey, there is an opportunity to provide your email so that you do remain involved in all updates on the project. So I'd encourage you to do that. For all these types of engagement, it is the preliminary design process, and then that will be fed into the final kind of designs and the project. When we go for planning around April, there will be a whole host of other ways to get involved, but do keep updated with us and spread the word as much as you can, and contact us if you have any suggestions on how we can kind of improve our approach to engaging with people in the area. So thank you all very much, and thanks to all the project team for your contributions, and we hope to see some of you next week or over the course of the coming weeks, and thank you for your suggestions. Okay, we'll close out now.